Welcome back, everybody, to the Choices, Chances, Changes show with Georgie Dickins and myself, Kit Tran. Today, we're so lucky to have my dear friend Jim Coley on. This show, we're going to talk about and explore the transformative power of personal and professional decisions. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now Jim, you're the only person I know that what I deem as a trifecta in the sense that you built a very successful career in investment banking. You then went and launched your own asset management business. And I had the pleasure of working with you at IHS Market at a fintech, and you were along for the ride the entire time as well. So I do want today to start off and sharing with the audience, like, how do you get started in your career?
Well, I think first I would say just on that point, let's just think I didn't really have that by design when I got out of college, right? So there is a certain amount of randomness that occurs in your career, and I think it occurs in everybody's career. And in fact, I talked about it on some of the stuff that I penned before. There's a certain amount of luck that comes along in your life at different periods of time. And I used to say it takes skill to recognize when that luck comes along, and then you actually get to try to seize that luck. So when I look at how I got on Wall Street, for example, I wanted to get on Wall Street when I left Wharton as a graduate MBA in 1982, but no one wanted to hire me, right? So I ended up working for a manufacturing company. And as luck happened to be, after my first year rotation, I got to go down to the Treasury Department and learn about capital markets. And I realized I had a real passion and love for the capital markets, right? So after the 2-year rotation was over, they were going to ship me out to a small town in Indiana called Tipton to be a assistant controller for the fire truck division. I didn't really care much about fire trucks at the time. And my wife at the time also said she would not move to Indiana. So I decided to pursue a career on Wall Street. And because I had gotten that background in capital markets at that manufacturing company, I was able to transition my career into Wall Street. So it's just, sometimes there's this randomness that happens in your career, and you don't necessarily have a plan for it, but you have to be able to be open-eyed to those possibilities and then seize on that opportunity when it occurs.
I love what you shared there about there's a degree of randomness, but it's, you said, being open to that randomness because, and you said at the beginning, like a lot of this wasn't by design, but I think sometimes careers aren't by design, but when you're open to opportunities and then it's leveraging those, you said seizing those opportunities when they come and putting yourself into those positions. And you said, capital markets, you had a passion for capital markets. If we could rewind back, pre-banking, the asset management business you set up, pre-IHS Market, the 7-year-old you, what did you dream of becoming growing up? What was where did you see yourself?
Astronaut. I grew up in a small town in San Diego. It happened to be the largest helicopter base in the free world at the time during the Vietnam conflict. Not only did it support the Vietnam, but actually all the Apollo, Mercury, and Gemini retrieval helicopters were based in our town, and many of our peer groups' parents, my peer group's parents, were in that business. In addition, my uncle actually worked at JPL, and later he became the shuttle director for NASA. So there was a vein of aerospace in my family when I grew up as a kid, and I grew up during that 60s and 70s with the space war, right? With the Russians. And so I decided I wanted to be an astronaut very early on, and I decided the fastest path through that was through the Air Force Academy. Similar to my father, actually, and like my father, we both found out at the late stage we were colorblind and couldn't be pilots. And so that passion ended in my senior year in high school, and of course then I had to think of something else. So that was my passion as a young person. But I did always have a love for markets. I remember in 6th grade I had a teacher, we did a stock market game, and I was really intrigued by equities. And I'm sure that was probably the earliest day that kind of lit that passion.
And what do you think it was when you look back and you said, in the classroom that there was a spark, like that spark was there early? What do you think specifically around the capital markets that pulled you in?
I think it's probably around the passion I had at a very young age for chess. Again, my father and my uncle were very competitive chess players, and I actually became a very competitive chess player through my high school career. And I saw the capital markets like a game, and I always liked board games and just gambling and card games and stuff. And I just thought this is something I could be good at. I could learn what the angles were and profit from it. So I think that was the main passion for it.
And chess player, I mean, there's so many analogies I feel that can be taken from the chessboard into the leadership world. Like, what are a couple of lessons that you've got are transferable from chess into leadership?
Well, I think the most important lesson from chess is learning what you can sacrifice for the overall game, right? Mm-hmm. The game of giving up pawns or even strategic pieces to win, for checkmate. And I like winning. I mean, I think I'm very competitive. If you ever meet my wife someday, and I know Kiet has, she would say I'm overly competitive. I think that's definitely one of my strong suits and probably one of my weaknesses also. And so I like winning at everything. She used to say with kids, "Can you please let the kids win at a board game?" I'm like, "No, I need to teach them a lesson. This is how it is in life." So I guess I'm overly competitive.
Yeah, well, it's that. But you said a minute ago, which I think is really important. You said, one of your core strengths. There's also a shadow. Not in this instance, not letting your children win. And I think for all of us, we all have our strengths, and for you, it's winning. It's that competitiveness, and it's recognizing when sometimes there is a shadow for all of us.
Yeah. Well, I would say the competitiveness too isn't just about the winning. I actually enjoy the chase. In fact, when I joined Market, what I really enjoyed was what I enjoyed in my early days at Morgan Stanley. So when I joined Morgan Stanley in 1985, it was actually pre-IPO, and we always knew Goldman Sachs was the gold tier firm, and we always talked about how we were going to take Goldman down, right? We were going to chase them and run them down, and the chase was the fun part, right? That's the fun. Sure, the winning is nice. That's just capping the effort, but the chase is a fun part. I always felt like that at Market too. We had Bloomberg and we had Refinitiv and all the big boys, and we were the new ones. We were the newer people, and the chase was the fun part. So I think the chase over the winning is even more important.
Well, the curiosity I have is, you were at Morgan Stanley for 15, 16 years. You were senior MD, doing extremely well. Like, why did you leave?
It was back to that chase. I actually think in the late 1990s, Morgan Stanley, and again, I was in the fixed income department, had become complacent. The chase was over, actually. We had won. Merrill Lynch had fallen, Salomon Brothers had fallen, a lot of other firms were weak, and certainly Goldman was still strong. And here came Anshu Jain at Deutsche Bank, who ultimately became the chairman and unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. But Anshu came and said, "Look, we want to be a top 3 investment bank. We're not there today." So it was that curiosity around the chase again, about building something. And I like building things or turning things around. And that was really the impetus to leave Morgan Stanley, where I'd been for 16 years, and go over to Deutsche Bank.
And what did you learn from that Deutsche Bank experience? Because you weren't there for long, right?
No, unfortunately not. I think I learned a couple of things. There was some political issues that occurred there, including the death of Edson Mitchell in late 2000 that caused a lot of upheaval in the organization. And one of the things I learned is when you go to a new organization, to the extent you can, bring your team with you, your management team with you. Bring a layer that supports you in what you're trying to accomplish. I did not do that. I wasn't able to do it for some other reasons. We were in a hiring freeze at the time, but had I done that, I might have been in a better position. And I think you realize that when you spend 16 years at a firm like Morgan Stanley, you build a lot of capital, political capital at the organization. And that doesn't transfer to a new organization. And so you have to rebuild all that political capital. Well, there's only 2 ways to do that. One is, through the years, which a lot of us don't necessarily have time, or you bring your network with you, bring part of your team with you. And I think that's the lesson I learned. And unfortunately, I failed at that. I didn't do that. And 2 years later, I was exited from the firm.
How did that feel, being exited? Having had a really successful 16 years at Morgan Stanley and coming in, Deutsche Bank saying, we want to be a top tier 3 investment bank. There's an excitement. This is the chase. This is the journey.
Yeah, it was the first time I'd been fired. Well, technically the second time. I was actually fired from Taco Bell when I was 15 years old. But
what did you do? You first of all, you can't just cross that story.
You forgot the cheese.
I actually told the owner, who was actually an ex-military Marine, I told him that I thought there was better ways and better processes we could do to make things faster, and he didn't really appreciate that, having only been on the job for 2 weeks. So that was the end of that. Being the day I was fired from Deutsche Bank, it was literally the most painful day I've ever had, probably in my entire career, because I didn't see it coming. I had come in to see Anshu and come in to present my plan for the year 2002. I'd spent a lot of time on the business plan, and I thought that was why I was being called to London. In fact, I was being called to be basically told that they had decided they wanted to go a different direction. So it was a very painful period.
But how come? Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, what is? There's a seed of something good in every challenge in life. There's always something we can take from it that we're like, you know what, I'm pleased in a way that happened, because I wouldn't have had this lesson had that event not happened. And in hearing me say that, like, what is one thing you took away from that made it a positive lesson?
Well, obviously the lesson we talked about I learned, so that actually helped me further in my career as I continued on to my next two portions of my career. And then on my personal life, when I shared that news with my wife first down that evening from the London hotel room, and then later when I got back to Connecticut, I didn't realize how miserable she and the family was around me, and that the toll it was taking, the stress that I was bringing home at that time, and how much that was transferring into our personal life. And once my wife shared that information with me, it really kind of changed my outlook of what I wanted to do for the next, well, I guess in that case, 25 years of my career.
Yeah, I suppose we don't always realize the ripple that our energy creates, or the way we show up. And so your wife in that instance is a truth teller of like, you're miserable. And how aware were you at the time? When she says, Jim, you're miserable, like how much did you relate to that? Like, did you think, God, she's crazy? Or did you be like, no, she sees me?
Well, so it's a couple of things there. First, did I realize how much I was bringing home? No, I actually thought I was shielding from them. Obviously, I wasn't, but I thought I was. I knew I was under stress. It was a very stressful organization to work for, and it was just post 9/11, so there was a lot going on Wall Street at the time, right? So there was a lot of stress, but I thought I was shielding the family from it, and in fact, I wasn't.
Isn't it interesting how we think we can do a really good job of having the shield up, but equally our energy field around us, that silent messaging can still be signaling how we feel inside. Yeah,
for sure. And so that was first of many transitions or pivots in my life and in my professional career. So I left Wall Street.
Now, what guided you to make your next move? Like, what were the decision logic to get you to, launch an asset management business?
Yeah, luck again, right? So when I left, I didn't know what I was going to do. I was taking some time off. I started coaching youth football, and I was kind of hanging out. And it turned out that one of my contacts, one of the people I got to know, was good friends with another individual in town that was beginning to build an asset management business. And so we got talking, and one thing led to another, and I ultimately joined joined initially as the COO, and became the CEO, and then we rebanked it another time. So we two different iterations, but it was in the asset management space, and it did bring back the elements of what we talked about early in my career when I was working at that manufacturing company and I was managing money, and I always loved the management money. Even though I went to Wall Street and was on the other side of the trade, so to speak, I always thought I could have been a portfolio manager. So working in the asset management space always had a kind of a lure to me, and buying things and building it from scratch was really super interesting. So I think those were the attractions. But it was pure luck. It was running into somebody who knew somebody else, and a conversation led to another conversation. And so much of my career and it has always been like that. And I think, again, back to recognizing when something is an opportunity.
But isn't that so the case where opportunities, it's through conversations and also being receptive? Because people, you've got to, the antenna's got to be up to receive the information. But I often think it's through those network nodes, which is the importance of having internal capital, external capital. Like no one moves onwards, upwards, gets opportunities without the help support of others. So how important a relationship, there's two parts to this question. How important have relationships been in your career? And if a mentee came to you and asked you, Jim, talk to me about how I need to be thinking about stakeholder management, for career success, what would you share with them?
Well, let's take the second one first, if that's okay. So first thing, I really believe in giving back. So mentoring as much as possible, right? Probably at market, I was mentoring at any given time 10 to 15 different individuals. And so, I think that's a really important aspect. As far as, that point, I always coach people and I say, what's your long-term view? And then where do you see yourself in 5 years? And then what are your steps to get to there? And if you don't have those steps, what is it you need to develop to put you in that position? But always be receptive, always explore. I remember, I don't know if this is relevant, I'm sorry, I'm going to dive off, but it just reminded me. I remember a good friend of mine sat on the trading desk across from me at Morgan Stanley. He ran corporate bond trading. And he used to say, when people go out and interview for other jobs, some managers would get really upset. Like, why are you looking at Goldman? Why would you go to Merrill Lynch? And he used to say, I want you to go explore every opportunity because I want you to know how good you have it here. So I think there's always a certain amount of exploration that you should be doing constantly in your career. I forgot the first part of your question though, but
I now can't recall exactly what the question was. We'll come back to it. But I think I remember when we had, I would have been like a VP at the time at JP Morgan, and we had, I think it's called Ian Slatter. Anyhow, he gave a talk to a number of VPs. And I remember him saying a similar thing, right? It's all good to have the conversations, but he talked about it at a wedding, but he said, but don't get to the altar and then come back and say, do your due diligence, do your mark to market. So again, you're happy, you're motivated, you're here because you want to be here, but don't come and get all the way down. Like if you are thinking about that, speak to us. And it was something that really stayed with me because I always thought like, don't tell anyone if you had a call from a headhunter or but actually like you should be aware of what else is out there, to your point, because then often people think the grass is greener. And actually that's just not the case.
Agreed 100%.
Now, Jim, you have an extensive investment banking career, so you must growing up very posh, like know how to build and cultivate networks. Is that the case? Or?
No, I actually grew up with nothing. In fact, part of my drive, I think, comes from the fact that I came from a very poor background. I actually, like my wife, actually, both of us, we came from very poor backgrounds. We both went to college full time and worked full time, pushing ourselves through college. I think we've talked about this in the past, Kiet, but I think that background didn't necessarily yield me all the tools that could make me even more successful than I might have been. And that's just the reality of my background. So back to what we talked about earlier, what do you rely on? You rely on the things that you learn, knowledge, hardworking, those ethics to propel your career. But no, I didn't come from anything, to be honest.
And where my thinking takes me there, that you mentioned, your wife, when you came from a poor background, worked through college, and you had a very successful career. How do you I think you said, is it 4 children?
4 children, yeah.
4 children. I'm just curious, because this is more from selfishly thinking, how do I keep my children grounded? And mine are, yours a little bit older than mine. How have you kept your children grounded?
Well, I attribute that to my wife. So, again, when you're working a lot, she's the main person. Now, I was lucky, that one thing, and it's one of my lessons I learned, and most people don't have the ability to do this, but when I left Wall Street for that about 10-year period of time before I got to market, running my own companies, I had a lot of free time and actually got to spend a lot of time with my children between that kind of 5 and 15-year age, which is super important. And I was home a lot. So I do think I had a little bit of impact on them. But our children were always, our children are pretty well grounded. And then they've all done, in their own way pretty well since graduating college.
And what's your oldest child called?
Brittany. So by the way, my children are one of the benefits we had, our children, 4 children are 4 years apart because we have twins in the middle. So they're very close also, which I do think fosters that relationship.
So if we said to Brittany, like, when you look at your dad, what are you most proud of? What would she share with us?
I don't know. She might not be the best one to pick, but she would probably say I was a hard worker. Intense. She would say I was intense. And I have to be careful with that. I had a coach very early in my days at Morgan Stanley. I first made MD. One of the things Morgan Stanley did when you made MD is they gave you a personal coach. And my coach said after my first session, he says, "You remind me of Superman. Your eyes are like laser beams, and you're burning the eyes out of my head. You have to learn to smile more and look away and be more congenial." That was one of my first coaching points. So my daughter would probably say I'm pretty intense, though, still, even to this day. I was going
to say, what does she mean by intense? Like, if she would, like, what would be behind the label intense?
Knows it all, has an opinion on everything, pushy, strong. I think she would say that. Funny thing is, when I look at my 4 children, she's the most like me, but she would say that about me. She's the same way.
It's funny, isn't it, when we start to see our characteristics in our children, because mine are 15 and 13, and I'm like, that's so me, that's so my husband. Like you really can see it kind of personified.
Yeah, I think you see, particularly as they become young adults post-college, you see certain attributes where you say that is either your wife's attribute or that is your attribute that's in them. And it's funny, I don't want to say because they'll probably watch the podcast and 3 of my kids are in the business, but we actually, my wife and I joke all the time that 2 of them are more like her and 2 of them are more like me. So.
Okay, well, at least it's balanced.
That's right.
Yeah, it is balanced.
Now, do you guide them in their career or?
Yeah, I think particularly those that kind of folded into the financial services space, broadly defined, not necessarily, that. I certainly helped all 3 of the boys. My daughter decided to pursue something in government, so it was not a network that I had, nor is it an industry I knew anything about. So was really unable to really help her. But all 3 of my boys, I think I provided lots of connections and career advice and stuff, and they still even come to today and say, what should I do now? So yeah, I'm still mentoring and coaching, I guess, even though they're my children. And I do it with other. It's interesting. The other thing I picked up is I do it with some of the kids I coach in football this day. Now they're all 30, 32 years old. And they'll reach out and say, Coach Coley, what do you think I should do here? So that those relationships still could carry on even to today.
Which again, I think is testament to the impact you've had on their lives. They wouldn't be calling you if you hadn't impressed upon them.
Yeah. Well, I think football gives a lot of great life lessons. So I was happy to have that experience with those kids back then.
You said earlier in the conversation, you talked about one of the banks that you work for, it became a little bit complacent. And I suppose it's when we're successful in our careers, it can be easy to be complacent because we're winning, everything, the results are all pointing in that, there's a positive trajectory there. So how have you, well, again, when I say how have you avoid being complacent, maybe you have been complacent, so I'm making an assumption there, but how are you, I suppose, not being complacent?
Well, I think looking at competition and looking at the market trends. So let's maybe talk about that period of time. It was late 1990s. I had set up Wall Street's first interest rate desk. That was my concept at the time. Of course, it's now been copied by everybody. And part of my team was the futures desk. And at that time, electronic trading was just coming online. And I was looking at it and saying, this is going to be a major event. We were number 1, we're doing great, but we need to really pivot and move into and it already occurred in the equity markets, as you know, Georgie. So I think it's looking at the market trends, looking at the competition, talking to customers, like what's going on, clients, what's going on, and not being complacent. And that's again, one of the great things about the markets, they're ever changing, right? That's one of the great things about the fintech industry that I love. So someone asked me the other day, what do you like? Why did you come out of retirement and come back? And I'm like, I miss the chase. I miss the the industry, it's constantly changing and technology being applied. It's just super intellectually fascinating. And I missed that when I was retired for the last 2.5 years. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's
it does. And I think the bit you said about talking to customers, that piece really landed, because I've seen organizations before who, they're in a dark room in their organization, and they're making assumptions around what they think the customers want. And that talking to customers, building rapport, building trust, understanding what they care about, what matters, what doesn't, like that's so critical. And it sometimes surprises me how certain individuals or organizations don't put enough attention or emphasis on that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, the rates desk idea actually came from a client of ours. I was talking to them early on and telling them about our challenges and asking them about their challenges and say, how are you responding to this challenge of these asset classes and how they're starting to trade together? And so, we're going to put these different groups together. We're going to call them the rates group. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't we just do the same thing on our side since we're covering them? Why don't we put our same people together with the same expertise and just mirror what they're doing? And that's where I like to think I invented it, but it actually came from BlackRock of all places at the time. So, listening to your customers. I think, by the way, I think market was really good at that. Like, again, when you're not in first place, right? You're not Refinitiv or you weren't Bloomberg, right? When I joined in 2009, listening to your customers and trying to be innovative and more responsive to them is really the way you begin to win.
But actually, Jim, before we touch on the market journey, because I think that's very interesting, but like, what made you decide, like, from being an investment banker to running an asset management firm to join a vendor?
Well,
like a vendor is like the last ground people go to, right? It's like a dirty word. Like, why do you join a vendor?
I don't know if you know this story, so I'm going to share a story that only a few people know, but I'm happy to share it. So when I closed our asset management firm in 2008, unfortunately, we had a bad circumstance. It's a very famous case in the SEC, but we had an individual basically destroy one of our portfolio companies, which ultimately caused confidence by our capital investor to pull capital. So we ended up shutting down the company. Some lessons there to learn. But and I got the call to go to market. And at the time, I thought, what am I most suited to do? I wanted to be a COO and CEO of an asset management company. But it's 2008, now it's 2009. It's the back of the crash. There's no jobs. I spent the better part of a year looking, and I get the call to go to market, and I think, well, this will teach me some skills about mid and back office that I can really use to become a CEO and COO. So my original plan was really only to go for a year. Unfortunately, what happened was we got into extended litigation in my previous company for 4 years, and I was basically frozen out of going back to the asset management industry. And I ended up staying in market instead of for that 1 year, I ended up staying for 4 years. We finally cleared up that litigation. We ultimately prevailed and won, which was great news for me personally. But at that point, I'd already spent 4 years at market, and I was already, as to Kiet's point, beginning to learn the business. Moving on, and I realized, well, this is a really interesting business. I really like the people. I really like our CEO. I really like the people I'm working with. I love our clients. We had great clients. And I thought, well, this would be a good place to finish my career. Wow, so I ended up just staying. But it was that randomness that kept me there. And then once that randomness cleared up, I just enjoyed it so much I ended up staying.
And I love the randomness word, because I think so many of us can reflect back in and sometimes, because we can't always plan for everything. There are so many unknowns that come on that appear on our pathway. When you reflect back of the arc of your career, what's one thing you know now that you wish you'd known, as you were leaving, you worked your way through college into Morgan Stanley? What's one thing you wish you knew then that you know now?
Well, I think, and one thing that I try to teach my children when they went through college is preserve your network from the early days. I didn't do that. So many people that I know today, even people 80 years old, are still in touch with their college roommates or their high school friends. I don't have any of that. I didn't realize how important it would be later in my life. I didn't really have the luxury because I was working full time, but I should have spent more time investing in my personal network in my early part of my career. Those relationships, it's amazing back to that randomness, how often those come back around at later points in your life. And I only figured that out probably around my early days at market, and really tapping back into the old Wall Street relationships that I had to rekindle. Because one of the great things about happening with Wall Street was when everyone hit the kind of their career level, 40, 45, and all get pushed out or whatever, they all went to the asset management industry, or they went to other banks, or they went into the vendors. And all those relationships became very, very important to us and to me personally. So that would be the one lesson, is really invest in your career. And it's hard. You have to physically work at it. It doesn't come naturally, and invest in it.
Yeah, there's a book by a lady called Carla Harris. I don't know. She was at Morgan Stanley. I don't know which side of the business she was in, but she talks about relationship currency and performance currency. And she said, many of us focus on the KPIs, the objectives, the sole focus on that, which is, look, if you're working at Morgan Stanley, a market, you expect to be a top performer. That's kind of table stakes. But she said the relationship currency is so critical and important. And it's not about building relationships for relationships' sake, but being really intentional about building up that stakeholder map or network, because that's going to serve you in your career. To your point, you said, when the people you're meeting at market, where sometimes a lot of this stuff goes full circle. And I don't think, not everyone, certainly when I look at some of the younger generations come out, they focus thinking, if I just do a great job, that's going to lead to promotions. But that's not enough on its own.
No, it's funny you bring that up. It just reminded me, a coach I had at Deutsche Bank, first session, he had a whiteboard there, and he drew a triangle and an upside down triangle. Have you seen this ever before? And he said the triangle represents, at the bottom is knowledge, and the top is personal relationship. And he says, when you start your career, in order to move forward, you're on the left triangle. You need a lot of knowledge. You have to be a domain expert.
Yeah.
And the other one is personal. And at the beginning, you don't have to know very much anybody. You just have to work hard. But as you go up the organization, what you need to know is less and less. Mm-hmm. And the people you have to know and the relationships you develop are more and more important. And he said, you're still stuck in the left triangle, Jim. You need to get to the right triangle. so it kind of ties into what you were talking about. And I just reminded that lesson, and I probably should think about that more often.
That's a really good visual, I think, for all of us. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things I think every so often for anyone to be checking in on, like, right, am I giving enough attention and focus to the part of the triangle that really matters for me in the stage of career that I'm at the moment?
I mean, the one thing you instilled in me, Jim, I remember we had this conversation about a decade ago where I told you I have 0 hobbies. And I know you ride on me for like a whole week, nonstop. You don't have no life, like get a life, right? So like how is your building that mindset of having a hobby and allowing you to also build and expand your network as well?
Well, it's a couple of things. First, I think you should have passion outside the outside the office, right? Whether it be with your family or with friends, or just personally even. So, I've always had. My wife used to joke every year I have a new hobby. She's just like, "What's the hobby going to be this year? The new hobby is guitar playing or whatever." So I think having hobbies are important. It gives you balance in life. But to your point, also, some of your hobbies actually help you develop your network. Back to the point we were talking about earlier. I've been fortunate through a good friend of mine to get into last 4 or 5 years ago a group of individuals who share a passion for fly fishing, and fly fishing, not just regular fly fishing in far-flung parts of the world and really interesting areas. And they're all fintech, financial services, and investment bankers, right? All very successful individuals. Having that network has helped me in other parts of my career also, because they all know people that I don't know. So I think hobbies opens up another side of your personality, lets people get to know you, and it's part of that network building. So yes, Kiet, I still think you need some hobbies.
And it's finding those places to have fun, I think, where you can be outside the boardroom or the trading floor. And one of my clients, she set up spin classes with some of her clients. Everyone, the people she invited love spinning. It was a great start to the morning. They all got to connect, have coffee together. They were all high on dopamine and all the good endorphins. So it was a way to connect, build rapport. But doing exercise, like you're ticking so many for them, and everyone's, hobbies will look different, but for that particular group, it ticks so many boxes.
It does. And then, when you think about your best clients through your career, it's always those that you had a real personal relationship with, right? We used to say at Morgan Stanley, people like to work with their friends. And by having hobbies and outside interests and allowing yourself to be, kind of let your guard down a little bit and getting to those people, I think is a real benefit. And those people are the people that sometimes become your best clients. So there's a side benefit to it.
You shared, you've got this wonderful piece on LinkedIn where you shared some of your 15 things you'd learned during your career, and we'll post some of that because I think there's such profound and such meaningful lessons. And one of the lessons you shared was around invest in the personal lives of your team. And I'd love for you to elaborate on that, because I think we can all agree the world is moving really fast, demands are high, environments are intense, and I think often people will be like, I know I should make time to invest in the personal lives of my team, but I don't have time. And yet it's so critical. I think the more we know about people, the more we trust them, the more we can support them. But I suppose I'm curious, when you shared that, invest in the personal lives of your team, what does that mean to you? So what does it mean? And then how did you do it?
Yeah, so I'm going to give some attribution here to someone but it was actually, I learned that lesson from Lance. And it was actually during COVID, and Kiet's shaking his head. So we used to have partner meetings when COVID was very early on, and we're all separated. And obviously we had teammates who were dying, or family members of teammates, or parents of teammates were dying. And Lance says, we have to be checking in with people and checking in on their mental health and making sure people are, so it was something clicked in my head, and it's something that I've carried forward, which is, if you want productive and happy people to work with, you have to understand the stresses that they're going through in their personal life. Now, you have to recognize that not all people are the same. Some people are more willing to share issues that are going on in their personal life and their health. Others are very private, and you can't force it with those that want to remain private. But for those that you can, you should invest in their personal lives and understanding what stresses are, whether it could be, a problem with their spouse, situations with their children, something with their health, and I think it's just being a good person and understanding that. But I do attribute that lesson to Lance, believe it or not, in those early days of COVID.
I remember, I haven't got my beach ball here. I remember one of my clients, maybe it's this, he shared, he had this ball, and he was an executive, a big organization. He said, look, imagine this ball represents, the surface area represents the person. And he said, you think you have a good understanding of the surface area of that person because, you've spoken to them on the way to a meeting, you've had a quick check-in. So in reality, it's like this dot. That's really what you know about them, because so much of what people bring in, that we're hidden. We don't tell them about our parent that's sick, or we haven't slept through the night, our child's teething, and all that feeds into the energy that we bring in. And it was just a really, because when he did the proportion, like this is the surface area, but like this is really what we know. I think it's just a reminder of like how well do we really know someone. I remember Lance saying when I was interviewing him for the book at one meeting, and I don't know if both of you are part of this, but he said, like, to everyone, I want you to write down, like, I want you to look around the room, write down like 5 or 6 personal things you know about, like Kiet and Jim, and because he wanted to, do you know their children's names? Do we work as a leadership team? Do you know where they go on holiday? Do you know where they live? Because it really spoke to how curious are you about really getting to know the person behind the title.
It's not just the people who work for you. And if you also reminded me of a lesson that we employed at Morgan Stanley, which is you also get to know your clients' personal lives. So we used to have a scoring mechanism at market at Morgan Stanley, which was 1 to 5, and 1 was like they'll pick up the phone, and 3 was like their preferred counterparty, they'll trade with you. But 5 was 5 stars on our rating was, will the client invite you to their child's wedding? Which necessitates, A, you know them well enough and their spouse, but not that, you actually know their children. And that always stuck with me, even with people who work for me. Like, how well do you know? How well do you know about their children and what their children are going through? Have you tried to help one of their children when they're going out of college land a job? things like that. So I do think I like the ball analogy. I'm going to be using that also. So thank you for that. But I think it's an important lesson.
No, it is, and I learned that later on in my career. I remember like when I took over the entire pricing reference data business in like 2014, 2015, I took all my direct leadership team and their spouse out to dinner, and then I realized like it's about learning about them and what drives them, right? Because you don't go like no one works for Jim or Kiet or Georgie, right? They work for themselves, for their family, right? There's a reason that drives them, and the more you get to understand that, the more you can collaborate much better, right? You build that closeness, right? You battle together and you see each other every day. So why not know a bit more about each other? I think it goes a long way.
You mentioned in one of the leaders who I think you were working for directly or indirectly at Deutsche had a horrific accident, and then there wasn't a clear succession pathway in place. How I work with a lot of leaders. What advice would you give them in terms of how do you need to be thinking about succession?
Well, that was the main takeaway. So, obviously the individual we're talking about is Edson Mitchell, who died in a horrific plane crash right before Christmas of 2000. And he didn't really have a clear succession plan in place. And that created a lot of upheaval in the organization, because what happens is all of a sudden people who are working collaboratively decide that no longer is it helpful to work collaboratively, and that they're in a race for that top job, right? So I think I've always thought that you should be thinking constantly about succession plans, right? It's just good business practice, right? So if something happens, let me back up. I think you should always be able to be in a position that if one of your key leaders leaves, you already have done scenario analysis in your head. What is that next step? And where I learned this was actually coaching football, youth football. So when you coach youth football, and someone goes down with an injury, right? You have to know, like, okay, if the quarterback's down, who's next stepping in, right? And it has to be automatic. You don't have time to think about it, right? The game is going on. Same thing is true in business. Like if I lose, this individual, who's next up, right? And it shouldn't be an afterthought. It should be well planned. And then you should coach the people in that next layer down to be ready to step up when they're ready to do it. So I think succession planning is one of those things that is really underrated by managers. I don't think they spend enough time thinking about it and implementing it. I think we were pretty good at it in market, actually. We did a lot of it, but early in my career, I think most people didn't do it at all.
Sorry, go on, George.
No, I was just going to say, but you never know when things change, like that horrific accident. Things can change in a heartbeat, and it's not someone's out for a couple of months because they're sick. It's like they're not coming back.
Right, they're gone.
Horrendous. Sorry, Ken.
No, because I think probably a market, we always think because market was founded by a bunch of ex-traders, right? We always see there's value in a call option. So for us, we're always thinking scenario analysis. If this happens, what would we do next? So for us, we're always thinking through 2 or 3 steps ahead. We actually have a scoring for people, a 1 to 9 score for ability, 1 to 9 score for their role, what they do now, and 1 to 9 score around their potentials. And that's how we decide how we move people around. I do think market's got one of the best talent management tool that I've ever seen, and how we elevate and navigate people around the organization. It's rare.
Moving into it like a different direction, we talked about the different roles you've had through your career, and I'm wondering, has self-doubt ever featured for you?
Every time I change a role, every single time I change a company or a role within the company, the first 30 days, I'm like, what did I do? What was I thinking? I can't do this. I don't have the background for this. I don't know what I'm doing. There's a lot of it. It's similar. I was a professional musician early in my career. And someone said the day you don't have stage fright when you go up and play in front of an audience is the day you should stop playing. It's the same thing. It's that stage fright. It's like, what did I do? And then you start getting into a routine. You start relying on your team, and then you realize 90 days in, maybe it's not so bad. And then a year later, you're like, what was I think? What was I scared about? That wasn't as hard as I thought it was. But I have to tell you, every single time I changed, market, I had like 11 different jobs. Every time I changed my job, I was scared.
It's interesting because people would, I think, look at you and be like, he never has self-doubt. He's never had self-doubt. He's confident. He's self-assured. And in my experience working with global leaders, I think unless you have, I don't know, you're completely, if you have a heartbeat, there are moments where that self-doubt is present for all of us. And it's then what we do with that. Like, do we let that, do we listen to that voice as if it were true, like, who are you to be doing this? Or do we be like, right, look, I know the pattern. Every 30 days when I'm in a new role, this is how it's going to appear. Then I know I'm going to have the team in place. I'm going to get into a routine. By 90 days, I'm going to be like, what was I worried about? So the more you get familiar with your own pattern, it's just recognizing it and I'm like, okay. And your quote there about musicians, if you don't have, when you don't have stage fright, stop playing because maybe you don't care enough.
Yeah, I think it's a good lesson too for young people, because I think until you've been through it a few times, it might be the thing that holds you back from taking that leap. So take the leap and realize it's going to be just part of the process. But I just recently came out of retirement. I've been here now 5 months at my current employer. I definitely had self-doubt coming back out of retirement for 2.5 years. Like, what did I miss? Those 2.5 years, what changed around the industry that I don't have the knowledge now that I've got to go back and gain. So yeah, you have it.
Well, let's go back a little bit because that's more interesting. Like 2.5 years in retirement. Tell us about that life and that experience.
I don't know.
2.5
It's
years.
probably not super interesting. I mean, I had a long bucket list going back probably 20 years that I've worked on over and over. I used to keep it on my phones back in the old days on the BlackBerry, and I kept updating it, and it was kind of organized by places I wanted to go and places I wanted to fish and places I wanted to scuba dive. And I had a good 6 months head up transition when I left market. My boss at the time gave me a good 6 months head up. So I was using that period of time that as soon as I retired, I was going to hit the ground running. So I've traveled the last 2.5 years, about 140, 145 days a year all over the world. Sounds like a crazy number of days, but I'm a super organized individual and I'm constantly rolling out my travel plans out 18 to 24 months. And so I just got on the road with my wife, sometimes my wife, since she got a little tired of doing some of it, but just been traveling all over the world and living life. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
But what was the moment as soon as say, and what's that conversation with your wife? Like, hey, honey, I'm getting out of retirement. I'm going to go back to work again.
Well, so a good friend, a colleague of ours, Kiet and I from market, joined an organization to where I am today, and he called me up and he first said, "Would you be willing to work 2 half days a week? Help me cover some clients." And I'm like, I wasn't doing anything. My wife had just told me, we had just come back from a long trip. She said, "Jim, we got to slow this travel down. Like, I can't take it anymore." So I was kind of hanging around, and she's playing golf with her friends down in Florida, and I'm sitting at home just reading the newspaper, and I get the call. And so I said, yeah, I could do that. And then he came back a little later and said, well, could you work 1 full day and 2 half days a week? And I'm like, well, that's just 2 days a week. And then I met our CEO, and he's like, could you work full time? And so all of a sudden I went in a very short period of time working 1 day a week to 5 days a week. And when I came back and told my wife, oh, they made me an offer, I'm going back to work full time. She was like, what? We're stopping traveling? She goes, this is going to impact me. So anyways, but I'm having a lot of fun. So anyways, it's good to be back in it. I think everyone thinks they want to retire at 50. I'm a little older than that, as you can tell by the gray hair, and I'm having a blast.
I remember a client saying when he retired, and he said his wife said to him, I married us till death us do part, not to see you for lunch every day. He'd been traveling and it is, but what you really came up for me is, when you initially took that retirement, you were deliberate, you had a plan. And I think it's so much about life, whether it's retirement, whether it's about career, it's next step. Have a plan, and look, that plan may evolve. It may be random. I love the randomness. Have a plan. And my coach once said to me, take the next step, and the next step will reveal itself. Because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And once you get to that next step, the world becomes open even more. And you can't possibly have known that insight, when you were 2 steps back. So I love the randomness. I love the planning piece there. And look, we always like to close our session with a bit of a quick fire. I'd say there's no right. You said you're competitive. There's no right or wrong. There's no scoring. It is just pure questions, just to get more of a flavour of you. And let me just find them here. Here we go. Let me just bring these. Do you know what? I don't know where I put them now. So I'm just going to go. I'm going to go on the fly. Favorite place you've ever visited?
Probably the Arctic, Svalbard last year. So I've been to Antarctica, which is great. That would be a second, but the Arctic.
Oh, okay. And I'm not allowed to ask any more questions on this because I'm gonna be like, where did you go? Okay, so I'm gonna morning lark or night owl?
Early night owl, but I during my professional career converted to a morning owl.
Okay, morning. Okay. What book is on your bedstand currently?
This one, you may be familiar with it.
Oh, yes. Good, amazing material.
This is for my next vacation, which I don't have one right away, but this is my next reading book.
All about being an
It's
incredible.
literally sitting behind me here.
Okay, it's like we planned this, so we actually
didn't. We didn't.
A Netflix series you would recommend to others?
Oh, so many. Can I just streaming service?
Yeah.
I think for All Mankind on Apple. Again, back to my astronaut days. The alternative, what they call the alternative history of the space journey. I love that show.
I'm going to watch that one. A mantra you live by?
I think treat people like you want to be treated. It's. I know it sounds trivial, and I don't get why people are unkind so much. I think that negative energy I just don't like it. Maybe it's part of my uprising, but I try to treat everyone equal and treat them like I want to be treated.
And I asked you earlier on about your children. What do you think if your parents were, what would they say they're most proud of?
Well, my parents are no longer alive. I think the fact that I actually was the first one in the entire family ever to go to college, I think they would say that.
Thank you. Kiet, anything you'd like to add there? One final question.
When are you gonna go back to retirement? I guess that's the final question.
Let's hope his boss isn't listening, like the CEO.
Well, I think what I signed on for is really growing this company, and we take it to an IPO in 3 to 5 years. So 3 to 5 years. How's that sound?
And then, well, this has been. This is, you and I have connected a couple of times. Kiet and you obviously work together. Kiet mentioned you have been a fantastic mentor for him over the years. This for me has been so inspiring, and there's clearly such a love you have for people and learning and growth and appreciation of luck. And there's just so much goodness here. And so thank you for bringing your full self and being so candid with the lessons that you shared.
Well, thank you for having me. And I'm flattered that I was even considered. So thank you.
No, thank you, Jim. And as I was telling Georgie, Jim, you're like the perfect example of the show of choices, chances, and changes, right? And what people make in their career, in their life, and all that. I just want to say to the audience, thank you for your continued support. And for those that are in stateside, happy Thanksgiving. And thank you, everybody. Have a good one. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.